Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are connecting from. I am thankful for you to connect, for connecting to this conversation. And please let us know where you are connecting from. The reason why I love doing this on LinkedIn Live is very easy to explain. I love building community. Sarah, you are sort of along the same lines here. We both love building community. And the one thing that LinkedIn does, which is pretty cool, is that when you are commenting on the chat, if you see somebody saying something that is really interesting or maybe referencing some research or whatever, you're like, oh my goodness, this person is interesting and I'm going to want to connect with them. So you are literally one click away from connecting with them, because all that you have to do is click on their name, another window pops up, then you go to their LinkedIn profiles and you can connect with them. So that's why I love doing this on LinkedIn Live, because it is a great way to connect with people, to learn, to very quickly build community, besides of course all the learning experience that we go through as we are in an actual conversation, something that is important to talk about. So anyway, I hope you value these opportunities to connect with others, to share ideas with them and whatnot. So please let us know where you are connecting from. We would love to hear from you. So I am, honored, and as always, it's a privilege for me to talk to Sarah. I think Sarah, Sarah and I met probably like 3 or 4 months ago in preparation for the conference that we had about a month ago in Hacking HR. Ever since, we've been going back and forth via email. She became one of our mentors for the Grow program. Sarah is an amazing person. Bringing all this light in a time of darkness. And you're going to find a lot of that as in our conversation. Sarah is right now the head of employer brand and culture at realtor.com, and this is going to be very important for our conversation. She led the crisis communications team at Stanford Medical Center for 1 decade. Sarah, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. And thank you for saying that I bring some light. That means a lot to me.
A lot of light.
Yeah, no, in fact, I loved your opening because, in fact, you and I met here on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is that we found one another with a lot of similarities of opinion related to how to think differently about people, how to think differently about culture, and the business construct of how people are a part of the success of what we do every day. So I definitely encourage people to share comments and find one another as a part of this community, because that's the whole point of this discussion, is just to learn from one another and see how we can grow.
Absolutely. Well, Sarah, thank you so much. And I know we're going to have a conversation around culture during crisis. But one thing that I want to begin this conversation with and ask you is, how do you keep your very chill demeanor, like very relaxed, and you give, I have a sense of peace when I talk to you, I gotta say, right? I mean,
Wow.
I don't know why. I mean, but how do you, and we're going through all these very difficult circumstances in the world. How do you keep that, that's peace that I think others can feel from you as well?
That's a heady conversation. Um, I I don't know that I always do. So let me just be really frank with you right there. I think right now we're all doing our best with what we can. And that's going to go through multiple different variations throughout the day. So 5 minutes ago, when I was trying to get my kids and my husband out of the house when we're in a COVID confined space, um, they're going to probably be doing loops around the neighborhood. So anybody who's out in the neighborhood, give them a wave. So that was not probably a calm moment.
Mhm.
I don't know. Look, Enrique, I rely on my faith. I rely on my own strength and my belief in myself and what I've persevered through and what I've learned along that journey. I've invested in friendships. I've been committed to my family and being honest and truthful. And quite frankly, I work with wonderful people.
That's
And
amazing.
and but a lot of what brings me forward with that light is sort of the culture that I've invested in, and what I want for myself. And so largely that's a lot of the conversation today, because we all have a choice in how we're going to live our lives and where we're going to work and where we're going to invest that time. And hopefully businesses are making the right decision right now too.
That's fantastic. Yes, we all have a choice, and we're all going through the same at this very moment, and we have a choice to decide how we face this reality, right? And let's just go, just go straight forward into the topic of culture. Whenever you companies go through crisis, I mean, the very first thing that they do, because it seems to be the easiest thing for them to do, is just fire people, right? Or lay people off, or furlough them, right? I mean, I saw this in 2008. I'm not seeing so much of that right now during this crisis. I think we evolved, and we grew up, and now we really are valuing people more than ever before. But that doesn't necessarily mean that culture remains something important when a company is sort of scrambling to get resources to get by the day. So how do you keep companies, and how do you keep the concept of culture as a centerpiece of organizational operation during a time like this, during times of crisis?
Well, let's get really clear on what the definition is of culture, because for many it can be a confusing word. We can think of it as kind of the parties and the hospitality that we focus on that celebrate multiculturalism. Look, culture is a group's particular way of life. It is the attitudes and characteristics of a particular social group. It is just sort of how you behave. And largely culture is a collection of many things, but it largely pulls from really, what do you stand for? What are your values? And so I appreciate that many companies are needing to be thoughtful about their fiscal responsibility and whether or not they have any money coming in. That's a reality. But I also think it's just very important to be clear on your decisions, because your decisions are your culture.
Absolutely.
It's not about sort of if you're going to have, a spring party or a coffee cart. This is about decision making. It's about what you fundamentally believe in, what your company represents, and that will guide what decisions are right for you.
That's very interesting. And now I want to switch that question a little bit and ask you, what would happen? What do you think would happen if in 1 week from now, and I'm going to knock on my desk, 1 week from now, we resolved this coronavirus crisis? What do you think would happen if, with those companies that didn't pay that much attention to culture while they were going through the crisis period? What do you think will happen to them from the perspective of their brand, from the perspective of attracting people or retaining people as they go through this crisis?
One of my favorite books is by Denise Lee Yohn, and it's called Fusion. And it talks, the title is Fusion, How Integrating Brand and Culture Powers the World's Greatest Companies. And I focus on employer brand. I've focused on brand and marketing and public relations all my life. Culture has always been just intuitively something that I focus on. My love language is acts of service. I love connecting with people. But Denise talks in that book about how every leader at every level is a link in the leadership change excuse me, let me get this right. Every leader at every level is a link in the leadership chain that connects culture to results. Basically, so if one of those links is broken, and if multiple links are broken, you have no leadership, you have no company, you have no culture, you're not going to survive. So there's going to be, maybe if we went back to work next week, for those companies that there were a lot of links in that chain broken, they would not, I can't imagine that they would be able to survive for very long. It's all going to come full circle.
Yes, that's really interesting, because it takes me to another question, which is, very often HR practices, my main network is HR, and it seems that HR practices or people operations practices seem to be, for many corporate leaders, the responsibility of HR, and that is not true. Like, for example, performance management. I mean, HR may be the facilitator of the performance management conversation in a company, but they don't own performance. Performance is owned by everybody in the company, all business leaders and whatnot. So your comment is very interesting, because what you're saying is culture, even though it's facilitated by HR, is not owned by HR. It is owned by all the business leaders who are responsible for building it, maintaining it, designing it, facilitating it, and whatnot. So that, to me, it's a very important message here, because very often I feel HR has this burden in their shoulders when they think like, oh my goodness, I am in charge of this, gigantic complex thing that is culture, right?
Yeah, no. Look, my title is head of employer brand and culture, but I'm not the head of culture. I think about it a lot. When we entered into this COVID crisis, that's where I spent every waking and sleeping moment pondering on, like, how can we as a business focus on keeping our muscle strong? How can we keep on keeping our people feel valued and recognized and appreciated, connected to, informed? And I wasn't the only person thinking about it, but I was certainly one that was my main priority, so that I could then share that with the leaders. Look, I mean, culture and leadership are they are linked, right? They are inextricably linked, and you can't unlink them. I read a lot about this, and I was reading last night in preparation for this call. I love reading all of the articles in Harvard Business Review, and there was this one article titled "The Leader's Guide to Corporate Culture," and I'll just sort of read it because I printed it out. It says that founders and influential leaders often set new cultures in motion and imprint values and assumptions that persist for decades. Over time, an organization's leaders can also shape culture both through conscious and unconscious actions, and sometimes with unintended consequences. The best leaders we have observed are aware of the multiple cultures within which they are embedded, can sense when change is required, and can influence the process. The article also then goes on to say, however, we've observed that there are many leaders who find this very challenging and don't know how to do it. So look, we've all got to be a part of culture. We can all be a part of solving for this together. And that's the nature of this conversation today, which is we are all part of our company's success. Leaders hopefully have the muscle to know how to do this, but if they don't, I hope that they also have people like me and you and others within HR, other parts of the organization, who do have this as their remit or do have this as part of their muscle that they've been developing over years, in order to bring this forward in a way that can then support them.
Absolutely.
Let me tell you something. I once worked with a leader who thought that the nature of culture, or the definition of what I did, was fairy dust. Like, that was a quote, fairy dust. That is not true. The culture is critical for your business success. It is critical for your brand. It is critical for your reputation. It is critical for everything that you do and ask of your people. And so put it in your decision making.
Absolutely, Sarah. That is fantastic. I have a couple of questions from the audience. Please, everybody, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. I'm trying to keep up with the conversation and the chat as well, so feel free to post them in there. A couple of questions, actually, Sarah. First one is, how do you correlate corporate culture with successful crisis management? That's a fantastic question. How do you correlate corporate culture with successful crisis management? Let's go with that one first, and then we go with the other one.
Well, there are crisis communications, and there are people who I work with every day to make sure that the definition of culture and communication, you can't ever tell really sort of where one stops and where one ends. I spent the majority of my career focusing in communication specifically. And I spend a good portion of my day now making sure that what our internal communications team is doing, our external communications team is doing, then resonates back into our culture, and it's an entire loop. If you actually take a look at a crisis communications or a command center, a war room, take, for example, something perhaps that's, I'm sure that's going on in any medical center across our country right now. You have a table of people around, you have a table, and it's filled in this command center with decision makers bringing information forward. You have definitely a person there who's responsible for communications. You have definitely people there who are responsible for all of the different factors that are critical for your business success. Communications, culture, brand, people, it's you can't stop and start. They're all linked.
Mm-hmm.
So crisis communications and culture right now are one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to, if the question is about measurement right now, I wouldn't know how to measure that.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that the nature of how you work together is vital. And often I consider myself part of a four-legged table, which is culture, brand, HR, sort of benefits and wellness, internal communications, as well as then social media, because I think it's very important that we communicate externally about also our voice and how we're taking care of our people.
Yeah, and it seems that, I mean, the no-brainer should be that if you have a great company culture, your ability to successfully deal with crisis would be higher. I mean, this is an assumption. If your corporate culture is strong, is good, people feel empowered at work, they are engaged. To me, the logic conclusion should be your ability to manage and deal with crisis should be better than for those companies that don't have that great corporate culture. Because, for example, let me give you some examples of this. There are companies right now where people are saying across the board, we are all taking a pay cut, because a pay cut comes before firing people, right? But in some of the companies, people are like, hell no, I'm not going to go to take a pay cut, or maybe, the leadership team just make the decision to say, I'm going to be, laying people off instead of finding other ways to deal with the crisis. So I don't know if you have this same assumption that if you have a strong corporate culture, your ability, you're not, it's not that you're going to be, totally protected forever from a crisis, but your ability to deal with a crisis should be higher than for those companies that may have a weaker company culture. What do you think about that?
I want to step back for a minute. We jumped into this conversation talking about exactly what's going on today.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about getting into the reality, there's an incredible amount of sympathy that we all feel right now for those who are impacted and affected. There is an emotional heaviness that comes with this. But how you step into any crisis, how you step into any communication or any business successfully, there's two things that you need to rely on. One is what are your values? What do you stand for? Okay. Enrique, there's going to be some companies that have values that you and I don't resonate with.
Yeah.
And those are companies right now that are making choices that we find distasteful or we don't find favor with. And it is what it is, right? But those companies, they have established a set of guiding and operating principles. And that's not something that's just printed on the back of a badge card or that you learn a new higher orientation. This is well-established, foundational, shared understanding of what drives that business. And you can't make critical business decisions effectively if these don't, or crisis communications, if they don't exist or if they're not clear. So you need to start with values. Okay. So if you see something happening in a company you don't agree with, you don't have shared values with that company. Okay. Number one, it is what it is. Number two, and these are interchangeable. I can't decide sometimes which one comes first. Number two, if you're a leader, you've got to start with empathy. Mm-hmm. Empathy is not sympathy. Empathy is putting yourself in the shoes of another. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes a wonderful company. That's what makes a wonderful leader. You don't have to agree with the other person, but you do have to try to figure out and understand why one person has a certain emotional reality. Then you can learn from it, then you can relate to it. And if you don't agree with it, that's fine, but you have to apply it. And adjust your story or behaviors to connect with those people more effectively. If you know what your values are, if you have a sense of empathy, a relatability, then you have, it's a muscle I've been working on for years, but then it will resonate and reinforce what you stand for, and the decisions will come, the communications will come, the culture will come. But it's not, you don't start with communications, you don't start with culture. You have a muscle, you have a foundation that exists of what are my values, what is my empathy, how am I going to relate to people, and then you go. And for some people, they don't already have that established. For some businesses, that's not a skill set that they already have, but boy, establish it now, or put people around you who do get it, because you can't just be sort of flipping a switch and closing the door. You really need to understand why you're doing, how this is going to impact the people around you, and how it will then translate based on their interpretation.
That is fantastic, and I want to connect that, Sarah, with an immediate question, which is, I mean, I think you and myself and many of the people who are connected in this call they believe in the concept of culture, right? They believe this is something important. Like the same thing with empathy, right? I mean, some people believe that having empathy, it's a critical personal thing to do, at all times, but especially during times of crisis. There are people who don't believe in this, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how do you convince business leaders that company values are important to build that desired culture? And more importantly, how do you convince them that to get to that desired culture, they need to work hard to, there needs to be hard work by the entire leadership team to build that kind of culture? Any thoughts around that?
Oh, I've got a lot of thoughts around that. Can we just start with value? There's a lot in there. So let me just talk about values.
Yeah.
Values, a lot of companies have created their values from day one. And when the company started, there were, a handful of people, probably the founders and a couple other people who locked themselves in a room or did an offsite and tried to figure out, what do we stand for? And those have probably gone through different iterations throughout the evolution of the business, but it's remained true and has been a core fundamental foundation of what they stand for. That's not always the case. At Realtor.com, we've actually been going on this past year, I went on a values listening tour, so that we could really get clear on what we stand for and what our behaviors are. We kind of needed to shake up the snow globe, as I say. Like, everything was there, but we needed to be really clear on where it was going to fall in order for the picture to be, in focus. Mm-hmm. And so, look, a lot of people will start with their leadership. We actually went from the bottom up. We went and spoke with all of our employees and said, what do you think we stand for? What do we need to have more of? When are you at your best at Realtor.com? What comes forward when we are the best company that we can be? And we categorized that into buckets of fundamental values that we care about: innovation, relationship, trustworthiness. I mean, that's just a couple of the five. But look, sometimes companies aren't clear on what their values are. They think that there's really just something somewhat dismissive about them, and that they truly are just a checkbox. But if you were unclear on what your values are, what you stand for as a business, your decision making right now is going to be compromised. Your future state is going to be unclear. The people who work for you are not going to know how decisions should be made, and you will be making an incredible amount of white noise hysteria because people don't know how they should truly make decisions, reward people, recognize, and invest. And so it's critical. It's critical. And employees are employees are using their voice through their feet. They have choices. Glassdoor recently came out. Actually, I think it was right before we broke for coming home, and they came out with this study that said, what was it? Nearly 3 in 4 adults would not apply to a company unless its values aligned with their personal values.
Mm-hmm.
So, look, this is going to be a very telling moment. This is going to be a very telling moment. And so, when you ask me, like, why do I come to this conversation calmly when there's so much crisis going on? It's because I actually think that this is when character is going to show itself in its truest form. And it's going to be a lot easier for many of us to make a decision about where we really want to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's this is really where things get real. And how is your brand? How are you going to treat your people? Because everybody's watching. They got a lot of time right now sitting at home figuring out, what does this company stand for? What's important to me? How am I going to invest my time in my future? And I've got options.
Absolutely. And I have been saying that, we in the next few years, those of us in HR and in different organizations, we are going to be measured but not by what we did or how we did when things were doing great, but when things were doing pretty badly, like right now. And you have many companies standing up, doing the right thing. I just recently saw Reid Hoffman saying that they will not lay anybody off from from their company, and Salesforce CEO saying that they will not be laying anybody off in the next in 2020. I think they are committed to that, and they are forcing their vendors to commit to that as well. I know it's a heavy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. Yeah. But they are trying to really live the values as much as they can, right? I mean, they have to also, of course, ensure sustainability and longevity. But so this is a great time to really live the values that people have been talking about for so long. I want to ask you two questions very much related to the moment of crisis that we're going through right now. Mm-hmm. One of them is, all the studies about happiness show that in the top 3 reasons that why people are happy is human relationships, and we are used historically to building those human relationships in person. We like to see others, we like to talk to them, to go to the coffee shop and to do whatever, touch them, hug them, shake hands and whatnot. We don't have any of that right now. Like all of that is banned because of what's happening. How do we build, knowing that that's the reality, how do we continue building culture and strengthening culture when we are socially distant, physically socially distant?
You get creative. You get creative and you use the tools around you. And okay, so I love this. Thank you for going here, because this is really fun. So I work in a tech company, and for many of us who are on this call, I think that that's our reality, though I'll go into different iterations of that. So we rely on a tool called Workplace. It's a tool. It's actually built by Facebook. It's if you think of it, it's basically Facebook for an internal protected audience of your people. Many people have intranets at their company, a destination or a portal of secured communication only for your company. And we rely on that heavily. So we've created new groups, not just about sort of news and compliance or benefits or business, where a lot of that is taking place, but we have new groups talking about family. We have new groups in there talking about music. We have new groups in there just talking about goals and aspirations. We got real human real fast. this is not a time to go through different checks and balances in order to sort of confirm that things are compliant. This is where, humanity comes forward in a way that's really authentic, and you need to let it, take place and exist on any sort of tools that you already provide to your employees. So whether it's Workplace or Yammer or Slack, those communities are popping up virtually. Social media is super important, right? So engage in, even if it's not internally, connect with people externally through Instagram, and people are using TikTok, people are using, LinkedIn like we are now, and this is also not a time, let me tell you, to feel like you've got to be perfect or polished. So just be human, right? So we've been doing things. Yesterday, we did a post where everybody we just said, just show us your coffee cup, or just show us your mimosa, show us whatever it is, but just post a picture so we can see your face again. For people who don't have these technology portals to use, you ever remember using a phone? You remember using a stamp or writing a letter? I have this dear colleague, Sam Weller, big shout out to Sam, who, when he's doing his web conferences, he's just got a whiteboard or a piece of paper right here so that people just sort of know what his priorities are, or what his shout out is, or what his love language is of the day. You see teddy bears and windows and rainbows, and you write on chalk on the streets. I think that that's just a lot of what we're all trying to do right now, is create a moment that's just human. So whether it's over creating playlists on Spotify, sharing music, whether it's going into an environment with a big Post-it on the wall that your child has drawn, which is a note of encouragement. There is just a plethora of opportunity for us to get very human, very creative, very analog even, and just create moments that are shared,
Awesome. By the way, I know, Sarah, for everybody, if you're interested in continuing this conversation after we're done, a couple of things. We're going to be sharing the the video of this conversation on our YouTube channel. So make sure that you sign up for our YouTube channel. And the second thing is that Sarah has been an amazing networker. And I know, Sarah, you're always very, very open to having people reach out to you and continue conversations and all that. So that's a message to to people watching right now. I got a couple of last questions for you, Sarah. One of them is, people are asking, now that people are being laid off from work, and we're gonna come to a second wave of shock, I think, during this crisis. The first wave came when everybody was sent home to work from home, and most people were not used to that. So that first wave, which I think lasted for at least 3 weeks now, people are getting very familiar with working from home and doing video calls and whatnot. The second wave will come when we see massive layoffs, which started about a week ago, and we're going to see more of that coming up soon. Do you think culture will take a less important role for when people are looking for a job in times of need? If they say, like, I don't have a job and they're offering me something in a company that I don't really like, but it's the only option that I have, do you think they will consider culture as a less important aspect of for them finding a job? And so that's one question, and then I'm going to ask the second one in a bit.
Well, culture trumps cash. Glassdoor says that 65% of millennials consider culture before salary when it comes to choosing a place to work, and 52% of those who are 45 or plus feel the same way. However, we have roofs to keep over our head, and we have mouths to feed, and we have health benefits that we require, and we need to keep surviving. So we make choices, and I can't tell anybody how to make the right choice for them. But what I can say is that culture is critical. How we treat one another, whether we work for them or we're in the same community as them, is telling. And I just, I'm very I feel that question deeply because while I have my job right now and I'm grateful for that, my husband does residential construction. He's not working.
Mm,
And so there is an underpinning of hysteria that comes with my my safety net is broken. It's not full. It's not reinforced right now. So I get how that must feel terrifying for people who don't have someone employed in their household. So Enrique, people are going to have to do what's right for them. They have realities that they have to solve for. But I do think that culture will always be critical. I think that while people may accept a job because they need to be able to pay the bills, I think ultimately they'll also hopefully um, find find a way to find a role that works for them
mm,
in a way that they can really shine. Um, we all have these wonderful, I call it workship. For me, it's about how to lead. The definition for me is how to lead a purpose-driven life. Purpose is really important to me. I think we all have gifts, and we bring them forward in what we do every day through our work. And I hope that people, even in times of being unemployed or being at home right now, will really just think about what are your gifts and what were you put here to do, and how can you bring them forward, perhaps in your daily work or even as a supplement to your work in a way that you really shine forward, because there's no time like the present.
yeah.
So take care of yourself, take care of your family, but also if whatever you're doing with your life in order to pay your bills and to try to cover your bases is not fully satisfying, figure out other ways to make yourself shine and come forward in a way. Get out of your own way. Get out of your own sort of like it's got to be perfect or I'm embarrassed or people are going to be critical of me. Now's the time to live your life and come forward in a way that you are really authentic to yourself.
I love that. I should end it in there, but I have one more question. But I love that because I've been doing these videos and all these interviews and different things online for quite a long time now. So I feel quite comfortable with it, right? But I understand that people do not feel the same level of comfort when it comes to showing their faces on a video or working from home, especially if they have a lot of stuff going on at home, right?
Yeah.
And I love what you're saying. This is not the time to be perfect. This is the time to be human. Being human means being vulnerable. Being human means having realities that are different from each other.
Yeah.
And I remember like about a week ago, one of my friends came shared a message saying that her daughter, interrupted a call, I think, and the person in the other side of the call got really upset. And I was like, I mean, why, right? I mean, you can't be like that now, not ever, but especially now that all of these moms and dads have to work from home and they have to homeschool their children. So it is not the time to be perfect. It is the time to be human, and by being human, we mean also being vulnerable. So I love that. I really love that. So in that note, I want to ask you one more question, and maybe a couple of things that you want people to walk away with. I mean, this has been an amazing conversation, but a couple of very, um, I talk a lot about the future of work, but unfortunately, the future of work is not like in 3 years from now anymore. It's for a lot of companies, it's next week. So very tactical couple of things that people can start thinking about or doing when it comes to culture in times of crisis, in their companies or in their own lives. So, a couple of things from your perspective.
Yes. And I'm following this conversation. In the next few days, I'll post an article which really captures, probably in a more crystallized fashion, everything we've discussed here, because I know a conversation has its own looseness that comes with it. So I hope you guys will go to follow me and just find that article so that I can outline some of the things that we talk about here. But what I would say is, number one, companies and leaders and people, be empathetic,
Mhm.
put yourself in other people's shoes, um, uh, and make decisions based on that understanding. Number two, know what your values are. What do you value as a business? What do you stand for? And make decisions based on that. Um, Number three, um, remember that culture is everyone.
Mhm.
It is not just someone who cares about hospitality or special events. It is It is a way of life, and it is a way of existing. We do it instinctively, and as a people, we respond to it. So make sure that it is shared, pervasive, enduring, and implicit. Um, and and the last thing I'll just say is be human, be honest, and be gentle with yourself. Um, and let yourself just step into it authentically. You know, I come before you today with my lipstick on and a cup of coffee, but 5 minutes before, that was not how I looked. Every other day I'm, wearing sweats just like the rest of you. So let's just get really clear on, we're all in this together. We're all going to do our best. Let's try not to beat up on each other. But let's try to be grounded in how we make our decisions and show up as our best selves, however we can.
That is fantastic, Sarah. Thank you so much. I think that is a great note. When we're building culture, corporate culture, it's also about ourselves. It's not just about everybody else. It's, we are in there too. And to be able to do that as change makers, if we are in HR, for example, we got to be able to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of others at the same time. And I totally agree with you. We need to have a lot of more compassion towards ourselves, especially during times of crisis when everybody's putting so much burden on their shoulders. Everybody, Sarah, thank you so much for this conversation. Everybody, I just tagged Sarah in the chat, so I know she's always incredibly open to discussing and connecting with people and networking. And please stay engaged with all the things that we're doing at Hacking HR. Sign up for our newsletter. We're doing a lot of things over the next few weeks. And on Thursday, we have a conversation with a number of HR leaders, and it is about what they are doing to keep their organizations operating in times of coronavirus. Next week, we're going to have a fascinating conversation with some HR leaders and consultants from large companies on what comes after coronavirus, because I don't want us to lose track of the fact that this will be over one day, and we got to get at least partially ready for the day after tomorrow, right? So I don't want to lose track of that. And at the same time, I also want to invite you to a series of workshops that we are going to be developing in April. We're going to have anywhere between 50 and 100 workshops. All of them are for free. All of them are conducive to credit for Sherman HRCI if you are in HR. If not, just feel free to join us, because this is a conversation that goes way beyond HR. So a lot of things happening, a lot of value added during these times, and I hope everybody remains safe, sane, strong, and engaged. Sarah, thank you so much. Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Be good to yourself.
Thank you, everybody.